After resolving the tense standoff with Jason Statham, the president of the biker club, and Rosie, the couple thought their nightmare was finally behind them. But Tucker and Vince's vendetta escalated into something far worse: vandalism and threats against neighborhood pets. Fear gripped the peaceful Los Angeles community as rumors spread like wildfire about dangerous bikers targeting local dogs. The fragile reputation of the Iron Wolves was now hanging by a thread, and Jason found himself in an unexpected position, defending the very motorcycle club he once distrusted. Before diving into part 2 of this gripping story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. As the Venice, Los Angeles night settled quietly, Jason Statham and Rosie Alice Huntington-Whiteley lay in their bedroom, with their 2 brown dachshunds, Dolly and Peggy, snuggled up in their respective beds within the master bedroom. The soft glow of the digital clock read a little past 2 a.m., and the house was wrapped in a peaceful silence following the day's dramatic confrontation with the bikers. Jason lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's surreal events in his mind: the encounter at the gas station, the tense standoff with Tucker and Vince, and the unexpected resolution at the biker clubhouse. Everything seemed quiet now, but his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. Beside him, Rosie slept soundly, her gentle breathing a comforting contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. Out of nowhere, Peggy stirred abruptly, waking with a start. Jason's eyes shifted to her as she climbed out of her bed, her small frame tense and alert. Dolly, as if sensing something, followed immediately. Both dogs were now fully awake, pacing the room with agitation, a stark departure from their usual peaceful slumber until morning. "What's wrong, girls?" Jason whispered, careful not to wake Rosie. His soft words, however, did little to calm the dogs. Instead, they seemed more insistent, climbing onto the main bed and pawing at their sleeping owners with an unusual urgency. Rosie stirred, her voice groggy. "Jason, what's going on?" "I don't know," he replied, sitting up fully now. "The dogs are acting strange, almost like they're scared." Dolly let out a small whine, her paws scrabbling at the sheets, while Peggy nudged Jason's hand with urgency, almost as if pleading for him to act. "Maybe they just need to go out," Rosie mumbled sleepily. Jason frowned. "No, this feels different. They seem scared, like they're trying to warn us about something." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, gently lifting Dolly. "Come on, girl, let's get you back to your bed." But as soon as he set her down, she scrambled back onto the main bed, barking urgently now. Peggy joined in, and the room was soon filled with their frantic yapping. Jason and Rosie exchanged worried glances. "This isn't normal," Rosie said, her voice tinged with concern. "Could something be wrong?" "I don't think they're sick," Jason said, his instincts kicking in. "It's like they're trying to show us something." Almost on cue, both dogs leapt off the bed and raced to the bedroom door, their barking intensifying. They scratched at the door and turned to look back at Jason and Rosie with what could only be described as desperation in their eyes. Jason got to his feet, his senses now on high alert. "I think they want us to follow them," he said, moving towards the door. "Should I come with you?" Rosie asked, her worry evident. Jason hesitated. "No, stay here. Lock the door behind me, just in case. I'll check it out and be right back." Rosie nodded reluctantly, her unease visible. "Be careful. And take your phone with you," she said, handing him his phone from the nightstand. Jason opened the door, and Dolly and Peggy shot out, their nails clicking frantically on the hardwood floor as they raced downstairs. "I'll be back soon," Jason reassured Rosie, hearing the soft click of the lock behind him as he stepped into the dark hallway. Descending the stairs, the house felt eerily quiet. Only the sound of Dolly and Peggy's panting filled the space as they led him toward the front door. Jason's heart raced with thoughts of what could be troubling them so much. Was it a false alarm, or was there a genuine threat? As he reached the ground floor, the dogs barked louder, their attention fixed on the main door. Just as Jason was about to investigate, the sharp, piercing sound of the security alarm erupted, breaking the silence. Jason jumped, his heart pounding as adrenaline surged through his body. He rushed to the security panel by the door, scanning the display. The system showed a breach. Someone had tampered with the gate. At that moment, rapid footsteps sounded behind him. Turning, he saw Rosie descending the stairs, her face pale with worry. "Jason, what's happening?" she called over the blaring alarm. Jason quickly silenced the alarm, the house plunging back into an uneasy quiet. "The system detected a breach at the gate," he said tensely. Rosie's eyes widened in fear. "Do you think it's them? Tucker and Vince?" Jason's jaw tightened. "It's possible," he admitted. "We need to check it out." As he moved toward the front door, Rosie stayed close, the dogs still barking furiously at their feet. Before stepping outside, Jason turned to Rosie. "Stay behind me and be ready to call the police if needed," he said firmly. Rosie nodded, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Jason opened the door, stepping into the cool night air. The street was unnervingly quiet, the stillness broken only by the rustling palm leaves. Dolly and Peggy trotted beside him, their barking now reduced to anxious whines. He scanned the area, his body tense. "Let's check the gate," he whispered to Rosie, who followed closely, her grip on her phone tightening. Suddenly, the sound of running footsteps broke the silence. Jason's head snapped up, and his eyes narrowed as he caught sight of two figures sprinting away in the distance. Even in the dim light, the distinctive silhouettes of biker vests with the Iron Wolf insignia were unmistakable. "It's them," Jason said urgently. "Tucker and Vince." Rosie gasped, clutching his arm. "They're back," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. It's crucial to remember that these two men don't represent all bikers. Many bikers are kind-hearted, even animal lovers. In fact, earlier today, we met with the leader of their club, who was outraged by their actions and immediately expelled them. Jason's words seemed to ease the tension in the crowd. Some neighbors nodded thoughtfully, while others exchanged murmurs of agreement. "You're right, Jason," the retired director finally said, breaking the silence. "We shouldn't judge an entire group because of a few bad apples." With the crowd calming, Jason gently urged everyone to head back home. "It's still the middle of the night," he reminded them. "We'll handle this with the police and keep you all informed of any updates. Sorry for disturbing your sleep." Gradually, the neighbors began retreating to their homes. Some lingered briefly to offer support or express their gratitude for Jason's level-headed response. As the last neighbor disappeared inside, Jason turned to Rosie with a wry smile. "Well, so much for keeping a low profile around here." Rosie chuckled softly, her tension finally easing. "I guess our quiet life just got a little more exciting." Jason's smile faded as he turned serious again. "We need to call the police now," he said firmly, "and I should probably give Pri a heads-up about this. He'll want to know that Tucker and Vince are still causing trouble." As Jason and Rosie re-entered their home, the adrenaline from the night's events still coursed through their veins. The house, once a haven of peace, now felt vulnerable. The reckless actions of Tucker and Vince had disrupted their sense of security. Dolly and Peggy, sensing their owner's unease, whined softly and pressed close to their legs. Jason bent down, scratching the dogs behind their ears with a small smile. "Good girls," he murmured. "You did great tonight." Rosie locked the door behind them, double-checking it for good measure. "So, what's the plan now?" she asked in a hushed tone, as if fearing the intruders might still be nearby. Jason's expression hardened. "We need to act on two fronts," he said decisively. "You call the police and report the incident. I'll contact Pri to let him know what's going on. He needs to be aware that Tucker and Vince are still stirring trouble, especially while wearing the club's insignia." Rosie nodded, grabbing her phone. "I'll call from the kitchen. You take the living room." "Sounds good," Jason agreed, watching as Rosie headed for the kitchen. "And Rosie," he called after her, "be thorough. Make sure they understand how serious this is." In the living room, Jason scrolled through his contacts until he found Pri's number. Despite the late hour, the call was answered almost immediately. "Jason." Pri's voice came through, sharp and alert. "What's going on? Why are you calling so late?" Taking a deep breath, Jason organized his thoughts before responding. "Pri, we've had an incident. Tucker and Vince tried to break into our house tonight." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Jason confirmed. "They vandalized our gate and spray-painted some threatening graffiti. And Pri, they were wearing the club's vests. The Iron Wolf insignia was clearly visible." Pri's voice turned cold with anger. "I can promise you, Jason, our club had nothing to do with this. Tucker and Vince aren't members anymore, as you know. They're acting on their own." Jason nodded, even though Pri couldn't see him. "I figured as much, but you need to know that this has the neighbors rattled. They're scared of bikers now, Pri. They're worried for their kids and pets. Some even believe all bikers are out to hurt animals." A heavy silence followed. When Pri spoke again, his voice was firm and resolute. "I understand, Jason. This is exactly the kind of damage we've been trying to avoid. Tucker and Vince are tarnishing our reputation and endangering our standing in the community." "What are you going to do?" Jason asked. "I'm handling it," Pri said with conviction. "I'm gathering my men as we speak." Jason felt a twinge of concern. "Pri, I appreciate that, but please, no violence. The police are involved now. We had to report it." "I understand," Pri replied. "Don't worry, Jason. We'll handle this our way, but it'll be clean. You have my word." As Jason ended the call, he heard Rosie finishing up her conversation with the police. He walked into the kitchen, Dolly and Peggy trailing close behind. "What did they say?" he asked. "They're on their way," Rosie replied, her face a mix of relief and lingering worry. "They said they'll be here as soon as possible." Jason nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Good. And Pri knows about the situation. He's planning to deal with Tucker and Vince himself." Rosie's eyes widened. "Is that a good idea?" Before Jason could respond, the sound of sirens approached, filling the air with alternating flashes of red and blue. Giving Rosie's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, Jason said, "Let's handle the police first. We'll deal with Pri's methods later." As the officers arrived and began taking their statements, Jason and Rosie recounted the night's events in detail. The vandalism, the graffiti, and the sighting of Tucker and Vince. All of it was documented. The officers assured them that patrols in the area would increase, offering a small sense of relief. But as the police cruiser disappeared into the night, Jason and Rosie knew the ordeal was far from over. Together, they locked the door and headed back upstairs, their thoughts heavy with worry. The quiet Venice night outside seemed to mock the storm brewing within their lives. Jason lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Rosie curled up beside him, her breathing steady but her mind restless. Dolly and Peggy, finally exhausted, rested at the foot of the bed. Just as Jason's eyes began to close, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw priest's name flashing. Sitting up, he answered the call. "Jason," priest's voice came through, urgent. "We found them, Tucker and Vince." Jason tensed. "Where?" "At the homeless area near Venice Beach," Pri replied. "Listen, I need you to come down here. We're settling this the old way." "The old way?" Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. "Pri, the police are already involved. They're looking for Tucker and Vince." "I know," Pri said, his tone a mix of excitement and urgency. "But this is about honor, Jason. It's more than just revenge. It's about restoring respect to our club." Rosie, overhearing, shook her head vehemently, mouthing no. Jason raised a hand to calm her, then spoke into the phone. "Pri, I get it, but we need to think this through." "But I have to inform the police about Tucker and Vince's whereabouts," Jason said firmly. "There's been a crime, breach of personal property. There need to be legal consequences." Priest's voice softened, almost pleading. "I understand, Jason. I really do. But please, just this one favor. Inform the police after the competition is done. It won't take long, just one round. Please, Jason, for the sake of our honor. This is a tradition our club has upheld for years." Jason closed his eyes, torn between his sense of responsibility and the unusual request. After a long pause, he spoke. "All right, Pri. I'll come. But keep it short." "Thank you, Jason. This means a lot. We're at Venice Beach, just past the waterfront near Ocean View Park. It'll be quiet there this early." As Jason ended the call, he turned to Rosie, bracing himself for her reaction. "No," Rosie said immediately, her voice sharp. "Jason, you can't be serious. We have work in the morning. Let them handle this with the police. It's not our problem." Jason ran a hand through his hair, visibly conflicted. "I know it sounds crazy, Rosie, but I feel like I need to see this through. I don't want the police to mistake Tucker and Vince's actions as a reflection of the entire club." Rosie's eyes flashed with both concern and frustration. "Jason, this isn't your responsibility. It's dangerous and completely unnecessary." Jason sighed, taking her hand gently. "I understand why you're worried, but I gave Pri my word. I'll go, make sure things don't get out of hand, and then we'll inform the police. It won't take long." Rosie was silent for a moment, her internal struggle evident. Finally she sighed, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "Fine. But I'm coming with you, and we're bringing Dolly and Peggy." Jason opened his mouth to protest, but Rosie cut him off. "No arguments, Jason. If you're going, we're all going. I'm not staying here alone after everything that's happened tonight." Recognizing her determination, Jason nodded. "All right, but stay close to me the entire time." "Deal." As they got out of bed and dressed, the gravity of the situation settled over them. The house, once a safe haven, now felt fraught with unease. Dolly and Peggy, sensing the tension, were wide awake and watching their owners curiously. Jason clipped their leashes, a wave of uneasiness washing over him as he wondered what role their brave little dogs might play in the events ahead. The night air greeted them as they stepped outside, cool, quiet, and filled with uncertainty. As they walked to the car, Dolly and Peggy trotted along beside them, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something much larger than a simple dog competition. The pre-dawn streets of Los Angeles stretched out ahead of them as they drove toward Venice Beach. Usually bustling, the city was eerily quiet at this hour. Pools of amber light from street lamps dotted the empty sidewalks, and only the occasional early riser or late-night reveler hinted at any life. Inside the car, The tension was thick. Jason gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror, alert for any sign of trouble. Beside him, Rosie sat stiffly, one hand absently stroking Dolly's head as the dog peeked out the window. From the back seat, Peggy let out a soft whine, sensing the nervous energy filling the car. "I still think this is a bad idea," Rosie murmured, breaking the silence. "We should have just called the police and let them deal with it." Jason sighed, his eyes fixed on the road. "I know you're worried, Rosie, but I gave Pri my word, and this might be the only way to stop this from escalating further." Rosie turned to face him, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Why does it have to be us, Jason? Why do we have to solve this?" "Because we're part of it now, whether we like it or not," Jason replied quietly. "Tucker and Vince targeted us specifically. If we don't see this through, who knows what they'll do next?" The familiar sights of their neighborhood began to give way to the unique character of Venice Beach. Even in the dim light, the area's vibrant personality was apparent. Murals adorned the building walls, and the silhouettes of palm trees swayed gently against the lightening sky. As the beach came into view, Jason slowed the car. In the distance, a small group of motorcycles and shadowy figures stood gathered on the sand. "There they are," Jason said, his voice tense. He pulled into a nearby parking spot and turned off the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. Rosie reached out and squeezed Jason's hand. "Whatever happens, we're in this together, okay?" Jason nodded, managing a faint smile. "Together." They stepped out of the car, Jason taking Peggy's leash while Rosie took Dolly's. The sound of the waves lapping at the shore accompanied them as they walked toward the gathering. The beach, usually teeming with life during the day, felt strangely ominous in the early morning light. As they drew closer, the details of the gathering emerged. Obstacle courses and agility tracks had been set up in the sand, their purpose unclear in the dim light. The distant sounds of barking dogs and murmuring voices guided them. Jason felt Rosie's hand slip into his, her grip tight with nervous energy. Dolly and Peggy, however, seemed to have forgotten their earlier anxiety, sniffing eagerly at the unfamiliar scents of the beach. Among the figures, Jason spotted Pri standing apart, his silhouette unmistakable. As they neared, Jason called out, "Pri, we're here. What's going on? Why haven't you started yet?" Pri turned, his expression grim. "Jason, Rosie, I'm glad you made it. But we've got a problem. Tucker and Vince," Pri began, his frustration evident. "They're not here." Jason's stomach dropped. "What do you mean they're not here? I thought you said you found them." Pri ran a hand through his hair, his annoyance clear. "We did. But those cowards. I don't think they're coming." Another club member, Nero, interjected. "Maybe we should give it 5 more minutes. They might still show up." But Pri shook his head, his voice resolute. "Bikers are never late, Nero, and you know that. I think they're trying to run." The gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore stood in stark contrast to the tension that gripped the group. Jason, Rosie, and the bikers stood in a tight circle, their faces etched with concern as Pri began to explain the situation. "We tracked Tucker and Vince to a homeless encampment through our network," Pri said, his voice heavy with regret. "That's how we found them earlier, hiding among the homeless. I told them we could settle this peacefully, the old way, through a dog competition. It's a club tradition." Jason nodded, urging him to continue. Pri's face twisted with disappointment as he went on. "I even gave them a chance at redemption. If their dog won, they'd be welcomed back into the club, on the condition they admitted their vandalism to the police and faced the consequences. If they lost, they'd have to return their vests and turn themselves in. If they didn't, we'd call the police ourselves. Rosie tightened her grip on Jason's hand. That sounds more than fair, she said softly. Why would they run from that? I regret offering them that mercy now, Pri said, his expression darkening. I should have just called the police right there, or dragged them here myself. Before the group could process his words, a sudden cry for help pierced the tense air. Help! Help! A young man's panicked voice rang out, drawing everyone's attention to the boardwalk. The group turned as the man ran toward them, his face pale and his uniform apron bearing the logo of the Venice Animal Shelter. What's happening? Pri demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Who's taking the dogs? The shelter worker, gasping for breath, pointed back the way he'd come. Two of you, he panted, his eyes darting between the bikers. They're wearing the same vests. Your people. They're vandalizing our shelter. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Jason felt a chill run down his spine, realizing what was unfolding. Pri's face hardened. Where's your shelter? He asked sharply. Just a block from here, in Santa Monica, the worker said, his voice trembling. There are other staff inside, but they're tied up with dog leashes. I was the only one who managed to get out. Without hesitation, Pri turned to his club members. All right, stop talking. We're moving out. Now. In a flurry of motion, the bikers sprang into action, mounting their motorcycles with their dogs in tow. Engines roared to life, and the group sped off toward the shelter. Jason turned to Rosie, his expression grim. We need to go too. Those animals need help. Rosie, her earlier doubts forgotten in the face of this crisis, nodded. Let's go. They rushed to their car, Dolly and Peggy sensing the urgency and keeping pace. As Jason pulled out of the parking lot, he saw the bikers already disappearing down the street. The drive was tense, the streets still quiet in the early morning light. When they reached the shelter, they saw the motorcycles parked haphazardly outside a modest building marked Venice Animal Shelter. Jason parked quickly and turned to Rosie. Stay in the car with Dolly and Peggy. Lock the doors. I'll go in with Pri and his men. Rosie looked like she wanted to argue, but nodded reluctantly. Be careful, she said, her voice tight with worry. Jason leaned in, pressing a quick kiss to her cheek before stepping out. Jogging to the shelter entrance, he joined Pri and his men, who were already gathered. Inside, chaos reigned. The air was filled with the frightened barking and whimpering of dogs, their cages rattling with their distress. Staff members huddled in corners, their hands bound with leashes, terror etched on their faces. In the center of the room stood Tucker and Vince, their faces twisted with desperation. Each held a shelter dog, Tucker with a trembling French bulldog and Vince with a spaniel clutched tightly under his arm. Look at these, Tucker sneered, shaking the Frenchie roughly. They're not even real dogs. This one doesn't even bark, and that spaniel's too prissy. They're abominations. Pri's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Tucker, Vince, this ends now. Let the dogs go and free the staff. The two men whipped around, their eyes widening at the sight of Pri, Jason, and the other bikers filling the entrance. Well, well, Vince sneered, tightening his grip on the spaniel. Look who decided to show up, the big bad Pri and his celebrity sidekick. You've crossed the line, Pri said, his voice low and dangerous. You're not fit to wear that vest, and you've betrayed everything the club stands for. Let the dogs go. Now. Tucker laughed, a bitter sound. Do the right thing. That's rich, coming from you. You threw us out, and now we'll show everyone what your precious club really is. Pri's patience wore thin. He signaled his men to start freeing the staff, who were quickly unbound and guided to safety. Seeing their hostages being freed, Tucker and Vince exchanged a glance before throwing the dogs to the ground in a desperate attempt to flee. Pri lunged forward, catching the terrified puppies before they hit the floor. "Nero!" Pri shouted. "Release the dogs!" At the command, 3 Rottweilers, Diesel, Raven, and Grim, sprang into action. They bolted after the fleeing men, their powerful bodies closing the distance with practiced precision. Tucker stumbled, Diesel's jaws latching onto his boot and bringing him down with a cry. Vince hesitated, glancing back, just long enough for Raven and Grim to pounce, pinning him to the ground. Jason and Pri approached as the men lay sprawled, defeated. Pri knelt, stripping their vests in a symbolic act. "You don't deserve these," he said, his voice filled with quiet fury. "You've disgraced everything we stand for." The sound of sirens filled the air, signaling the arrival of the police. Jason turned to Rosie, still waiting in the car, giving her a reassuring nod as officers poured out of their vehicles. "Officers," Jason began, stepping forward. "We have a lot to explain." Before Jason could respond, one of the officers conducting a search of Tucker and Vince called out, "Sir, you're going to want to see this." The officer held up several small bags filled with what appeared to be illegal substances. The lead officer's eyebrows shot up. "Well, well," he muttered, "looks like we've got more than just vandalism and attempted break-in to handle here." As the police arrested Tucker and Vince, reading them their rights and securing them in patrol cars, Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. The nightmare that had begun with a seemingly simple trip to the gas station was finally nearing its end. Rosie emerged from the car, carrying Dolly and Peggy in her arms, and approached Jason. "Is it over?" she asked softly, leaning into his side. Jason nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think so," he replied. "At least this part of it." A detective approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Statham, Mrs. Huntington-Whiteley," she introduced herself. "I'm Detective Sarah Martinez. I'd like to get your statements about the events of last night and this morning, if you don't mind." Jason adjusted Peggy in his arms and nodded. "Of course, Detective. Where would you like us to start?" "Let's begin with the incident at your home," Detective Martinez suggested. "I understand there was an attempted break-in and vandalism." Over the next hour, Jason and Rosie recounted the night's events in detail, the disturbance at their home, the threatening graffiti, and the chain of events leading to the animal shelter. Jason emphasized the role of Pri and the biker club in apprehending Tucker and Vince, ensuring their efforts were recognized. Detective Martinez nodded as she listened. "And you say this all started with an encounter at a gas station?" she asked, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. Rosie gently stroked Dolly's head as she replied, "Yes, that's right. Tucker kicked our dog Peggy, and things escalated from there." As their story unfolded, other officers gathered around, intrigued by the unusual series of events involving a celebrity couple, rogue bikers, and a midnight animal shelter rescue. Even Pri, who had been giving his own statement nearby, joined the group as Jason described the club's involvement. "I want to be clear," Pri interjected, his tone firm. "Tucker and Vince's actions don't represent our club or its values. We came here to stop them and protect the animals." Detective Martinez made a note and nodded. "We appreciate your cooperation. It's clear your club's intervention was crucial in resolving this situation peacefully." When the statements concluded, Jason noticed the officer's demeanor toward the bikers had shifted. What had started with suspicion now carried a hint of respect. "Well," Detective Martinez said, closing her notepad, "we've got plenty to press charges: attempted break-in, vandalism, animal cruelty, possession of illegal substances. They're looking at serious time." Jason and Rosie exchanged relieved glances. The ordeal that began at a gas station was finally coming to a close. As the investigation wrapped up, Jason noticed reporters gathering at the edge of the police cordon. News of the incident and the presence of a celebrity couple had clearly spread. Rosie saw them too and tensed slightly. "Jason," she said quietly, "I think it's time for us to go. We've done what we needed here." Jason nodded in agreement. They had given their statements, ensured the animal's safety, and seen Tucker and Vince brought to justice. There was no need for a media spectacle. Pre approached them one last time. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for trusting us, for being here. You didn't have to, but you were. You gave us a chance to make this right." Jason shook Pre's hand firmly. "Thank you for stepping up when it mattered. You've shown us there's more to your club than meets the eye." A mutual understanding passed between them, an acknowledgment of the unlikely alliance forged in the face of adversity. As they walked to their car, Pre's voice carried behind them, addressing the reporters. "This is not what our club, or any biker club, stands for," he said firmly. "We're part of this community, and we stand against those who harm animals or threaten our neighbors." Jason helped Rosie settle Dolly and Peggy into the back seat before getting into the car himself. He took one last look at the scene behind them. Police cars, animal shelter staff, and bikers standing side by side with law enforcement. It was a moment that defied easy categorization, one that might challenge perceptions and bring the community closer together. As they drove home, the chaos of the past 24 hours faded into the rearview mirror. Jason and Rosie exchanged a look of shared understanding. Their quiet life had been disrupted, but they emerged stronger, with a new appreciation for the unexpected allies they had found. Pulling into their driveway, the sight of their home brought a welcome sense of relief. Dolly and Peggy perked up in the back seat, tails wagging eagerly. Just as Jason turned off the engine, their neighbor Tom, who had been vocal with concerns the night before, approached. Jason braced himself for more questions, but instead Tom called out, "Jason, Rosie, I owe you an apology." Surprised, Jason and Rosie exchanged a glance before turning to him. "I've been following the news coverage," Tom admitted. "I judged the bikers too quickly. Seeing how Pre and his club handled things, I was wrong. I'm sorry." Rosie smiled and placed a hand on Tom's arm. "It's been stressful for all of us. What matters is you're willing to reconsider." Jason nodded. "We've learned a lot too. There's often more to people than meets the eye." With a grateful nod, Tom walked back to his house, leaving Jason and Rosie to finally head inside. Collapsing onto the couch, the exhaustion of the last day hit them at once. Dolly and Peggy hopped onto their laps, curling up contentedly. "Well," Jason said, breaking the silence, "this wasn't quite the quiet life we had in mind." Rosie laughed, her voice light. "No, it wasn't. But I wouldn't change it. Look at what we've accomplished." Jason smiled, stroking Peggy's fur. "You're right. We've helped bridge a gap in the community. Maybe this is just the beginning." As sunlight streamed through the windows, they sat together, surrounded by warmth and the love of their loyal dachshunds. The quiet morning sounds of their neighborhood, children playing, dogs barking, and the distant rumble of motorcycles, carried no sense of threat, only a feeling of unity. Jason and Rosie exchanged a look of deep understanding. They had faced challenges together and emerged stronger. Whatever surprises life brought, they knew they were ready, with Dolly and Peggy by their side and a community that was closer than ever.